Today I've called this podcast Moving to the Beat of My Own Drum. To start off with, I am the youngest of 4 children and the only girl. So I'm casting my mind back to when I was a child, and I went to a Catholic school with nuns and all that sort of jazz, and I sometimes found it really hard to have such strict rules and regulations about almost anything you could imagine going to a Catholic school. The length of your skirt, whether you wore earrings, makeup was not allowed. There were so many rules, and I'm not one to slavishly follow rules, I'm afraid, and I found that difficult. And there was one particular teacher who, for some reason, took a dislike to me. And in my school, I don't know whether it was designed to build character or what it was, but we didn't have cleaners. We had the responsibility of being rostered on sweeping the floors and emptying rubbish bins and stuff in our main classroom. And as I said, there was a roster, so I popped into the classroom to grab something, and this teacher who took a dislike to me, she said, "Susan, stay behind and help with cleaning up the classroom." And I said, "I'm sorry, miss, but I've got hockey practice." And she said, "I told you to stay and do the sweeping." And I said, "I've got hockey practice." And she said, "I don't care, stay and do the sweeping." And I just said, "Look, I'm not going to stay. I have hockey practice. I'm not rostered on. If I was, I would stay. But I have hockey practice, so no, I'm not going to stay." And she, to me, was just trying to force me to comply to her wishes and acted as if I had rights of my own to do what I was scheduled to do, which was to go to hockey practice. She also taught another class. I can't remember what the main class was, but she taught a second class, which I had the misfortune to be in. And I remember, this may not surprise people who know me well, but I tended to get told off for talking in class a bit and gazing out the window and tuning out whatever boring subject might be happening at the time. And this particular teacher again said, "Susan, stop talking," she said. "Just stop talking. You're supposed to be focusing on your schoolwork." And so for a few seconds or milliseconds, knowing me, I stopped talking, and then I started talking again to my friend next to me. And she said, "Susan, stand up." So I stood up. She said, "Susan, put your hands on your head and stay there." And I put my hands on the top of my head for a millisecond, and I took them down. And I was 13 years of age. She said, "Susan, put your hands back up on your head." And I stood there and I looked at her and I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. It's undignified and unnecessary, and I refuse." Well, she nearly exploded on the spot. So she blustered at me and said, "Go and see the headmistress." And I said, "Sure, we'll go and see her." And I did, and I can't even remember what I might have had to wash some windows maybe, but I can't even remember what the punishment was. But I was actually quite proud of myself that she had tried to belittle me. Sure, I was talking in class, but it wasn't necessary for her to try and make me look stupid in front of my classmates. So yeah, I've always rebelled against unnecessary things that have been imposed upon me. And so I've always liked to find my own way. I worked as a social worker for many years, and I was once asked what informed my practice in the way of theory. Now, I'm not inclined to think of myself as an academic at all. I mean, I do have a degree, but I don't consider myself an academic. And so when people were discussing things and using complex terminology that only social workers would understand, it left me cold. I know a lot of people would use sort of more formal language with their patients, but I never did. I always spoke to them on their level. I didn't use fancy words. I tried to be as real and normal as possible, and that's what worked for me. And yet other people might have expected me to use that formal language because that was being professional. Well, being professional to me was being true to myself, not having an enforced code of behaviour. So one of the things that I used to do was I would take a notepad and I would jot some bits and pieces down while I was talking to people, and I would read back to them what we had discussed and what we had agreed. And I didn't take any forms in, and I'd felt that taking forms in to meet with people and asking them to verbally tick boxes while I tick them off on the form really wasn't my cup of tea. And so when just before I retired last year, they brought in a new system on a computer, and you had to enter in every interaction, every phone call, every conversation, whether it was with a staff, a patient, a family. I think you just about had to record if you were talking to yourself the way they wanted to record everything in creation. And so I found that hard. I didn't want to take a laptop in with me to talk to somebody, and they said, oh, well, you don't need to, you can do it afterwards. Well, having to do this computer work added to the workload, and it created unnecessary work, and it felt like it was creating unnecessary formality, for me at least. So I struggled with doing it. I was good, I did what I was told, but I struggled with it. And I've found all my life that if I'm not true to myself, if I have to do things that don't fit for me, then I don't do well. So, as most of you will know that have listened to me previously, I am back to playing bowls. I had quite a bit of time off, probably about a year, because I had first a knee operation, and then within months, it seems, I had to have a major operation on my back. So I had that operation in February of this year. And so when I had the operation, the main goal for me was to get back to playing bowls. And that was my main motivator. I had had a lovely red e-bike that I'd also wanted to get back to riding, but my husband had expressed some concern about the safety of doing that after my operation and moving forward. And I had been firm in the decision that I was going to get back to riding my bike. And then when I had my back operation, I was in hospital, and it dawned on me how significant this back injury and subsequent surgery had been. And so I thought to myself, if I fell off my bike after a back operation and wrecked what had been done, I could end up severely injured, maybe in a wheelchair, who knows. But I very much made the decision for myself, which my husband was relieved about, but it was my decision. But when it came to bowls, that was the one thing. My husband said to me at one stage, would you be happy riding your bike and falling off, and that meant that you could never get back to bowls? And I said, no, of course I wouldn't. He said, well, that's something to consider then when you're making up your mind. And so I'm pleased that I gave up my e-bike and that I'm getting back to bowls. But getting to the moving to the beat of my own drum part of this, I've been back playing bowls maybe since, maybe a month or two at the very, very most. And I had some coaching. There was a coaching clinic that was 2 all-day sessions, 2 weeks apart. And we were taught to do various things, how to deliver the bowl, the stance, how to hold the bowl, all sorts of things. And before my operation, I had actually been bowling quite well. I had been doing some good shots. I hardly ever did duff ones, and I felt like I was doing well. That was pre-operation. So when I went back to bowls, having had the operation in February, I think I went back to bowls in maybe, September. And I had talked to myself internally about what I might need to do to get back to bowls. And I thought to myself that I should do a review of how I played my bowls. And so I did this coaching. And the woman who was the coach was very much my way or the highway. And I found that almost everything she tried to get me to do didn't sit well with me. It didn't feel natural. I couldn't sort of relax and play my bowl. And so, I got her to concede that I could hold my bowl at least the way I wanted to. So I had these 2 sessions with her, and during those coaching sessions, I played awful bowls, really awful bowls, because I was trying to comply with her standards and her way of doing things. But I thought, well, I've got to try and take this on board. She obviously knows what she's doing. So I went away from that coaching. I thought I'll try and inject some elements of what she's tried to teach me and see how it goes. And one of the things she had said to me was, for balance, I might need to do a static stance. And I've always done a bit of a small step forward, but I adopted the static stance. I had a second coach that I went to see sometime later, and he told me some different ways to do things. And I wasn't too bad when I was with him, but when I tried to remember everything he'd tried to teach me, I just didn't have the capacity to put it all together. So a little bit of time goes by, and I'd had good days and not so good days. And we have club championships, and I put my name down for a singles tournament with a very new bowler, and I thought that I would probably do at least as well as her, if not better. And so we started into the game, and honestly, it was the first to 21, and I played abysmally throughout, and I couldn't actually understand why. So, afterwards I did a little bit of self-analysing, and this is what I've come up with. I have always been somebody that needs to move to the beat of their own drum. I need to do things my way, and forcing myself to work in a way that suits other people and not me doesn't have good results. The other thing, and I feed this back to my opponent who thrashed me, by the way, 21-3, at least it wasn't quite a down trowel. I said to her, not taking away from you what you've done, how you played the game and the fact that you won, and congratulations on that. But I figured out why you did better than me. And she said, oh, what's that? And I said, because when I think about it, you were happy, joking, relaxed. You treated this like just any other game, and that stood you in good stead. On the other hand, for myself, it was my first official tournament, my first singles game ever. I was really nervous. I wanted to do well. And I stood on that mat and I sent bowl after terrible bowl after terrible bowl after terrible bowl. I obviously got 3 points. I won maybe 3 games with 1 point each. And it was the worst bowling ever. And I came home quite disheartened. And I said to my husband, he said, how did it go? And I said, absolutely terrible, absolutely terrible. I couldn't have played worse if I tried. And I was actually quite upset. And then on Saturday, there was a roll-up, which is a reasonably casual game that we have on a Saturday afternoon. So I played in this roll-up, and again, I did some really shocking bowls. And I was very fortunate to be with a group of people that were a lot of us were newbies, and the people that were sort of in charge of skips, etc., were very understanding. And one of the other players, who also has the same name as me, she sort of said to me, what do you think's going wrong, Sue? And I tried to analyse it, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to do this that this one said, and this that another one said, all these coaches in my head, and I said, I've just got all these hints and tips and ways of doing things zooming around in my head, and I can't pick out from the chaos in my brain. I can't pick out which to go with. And so I tried to keep with the static stance that I'd been told. I tried to hold the bowl the way I've been told, all sorts of things. And it still wasn't getting any better. And then I said to her, look, it's still not getting better. I've made a decision. When I was bowling before I had my operations, I was bowling quite well, wasn't I? And she said, yeah, you were. And I said, I didn't have any of the stress. I just enjoyed my game. Every now and again you put a duff one down, but predominantly I was playing well. And she agreed. And I had this light bulb moment. I've always said that I'm better to just work things out for myself, that I have a way of adjusting my life and things in my life to suit my capabilities or my abilities. So I said to her, I'm going to stop listening to all those voices in my head. I'm going to just play my game and enjoy my game. And I'm just going to trust in myself and bowl the way I know that I can bowl by doing so. I'm going to also try and relax and not get so stressed and anxious, because every time I got on the mat I was getting really stressed that I would do it wrong, and of course, because I was stressed, I often did. So once I made that decision, and we only had about 4 ends to go, I started to pick up and I started to bowl some nice bowls, and everybody was saying, "Well done, Sue, that's much better." So what I need to do in this life, and anything that I feel that I want to achieve, anything that I want to do, I need to do what is right for me. As much as possible, I need to do what is right for me in the way that is right for me. I need to continue to move to the beat of my own drum, to trust in my abilities, and to be honest with myself if I can't do stuff, and it might be an issue somewhere down the line. But as long as I do things that I know that I trust that I can do, I trust that I know how to bowl a bowl, the amount of green to take, the amount of weight to take, all those sorts of things. I am just going to relax into it when I go to bowls tomorrow, and I am going to enjoy my time without the stress. So this has been Sue for Parkies and Me, my journey with Parkinson's. Kia kaha, be brave, be strong, be you.